Montana Territory, 1874. The weight of a loaded Colt revolver sat heavy against Quinn Nolan's hip as he gazed out at the distant mountains, their peaks shrouded in an early morning mist. The frontier post stood lonely against the vast Montana landscape, a crude wooden structure meant to guard a rarely traveled pass. 26 years old and already Quinn felt like he had lived several lifetimes, each one etched in the calluses on his hands. Quinn adjusted his wide-brimmed hat against the rising sun and exhaled slowly. 6 months at this godforsaken outpost with only occasional travelers and his own thoughts for company. The isolation suited him just fine. Out here, a man answered to no one but himself and the unforgiving land. Relationships were dangerous, they made you vulnerable, gave you something to lose, and in the West, loss was as common as prairie dust. No one to disappoint out here, he muttered, scanning the horizon where the road disappeared into rolling hills. No one to let down. His commander had praised his dedication when assigning him to this remote station. "Nolan, you're the only man I trust to hold this post alone," Captain Winters had said. Quinn hadn't bothered explaining that he volunteered for the assignment because people complicated things. The harsh simplicity of frontier life made sense in ways human connections never did. Quinn's parents had died crossing the Oregon Trail when he was just 14, his father from fever, his mother from a broken wagon wheel that crushed her chest when their oxen spooked at a rattlesnake. The memory still visited him in dreams. After burying them both, he'd continued west with the wagon train, eventually finding work as a ranch hand, then as a scout, and finally as a frontier guard for the territorial government. Frontier's no place for sentiment, he reminded himself, an established ritual each morning, just survival. The sound of approaching hooves pulled Quinn from his thoughts. He squinted down the dusty road, making out 3 riders and a small wagon. Visitors were rare enough to warrant caution. His hand instinctively moved to his revolver as he stepped onto the rough-hewn porch of the guardhouse. The travelers approached slowly, and as they drew near, Quinn could see it was an older man driving the wagon with a woman beside him. 2 men on horseback flanked them, hands conspicuously close to their weapons. The arrangement struck him as peculiar. "State your business," Quinn called out when they were within earshot. The driver pulled the wagon to a halt. "Name's Walter White. My niece and I are traveling to Helena with my sons. Just passing through." Something in the man's eyes didn't sit right with Quinn, and the young woman beside him kept her gaze fixed downward. She wore a simple blue dress, and what he could see of her face suggested youth and beauty concealed beneath a bonnet. "Territorial regulations require I record all travelers through this pass," Quinn said evenly. "Please come inside and sign the ledger." The 2 mounted men exchanged glances. The older of the 2 spoke, his voice carrying an edge. "That really necessary, guard? We're just simple folk passing through." "It is necessary," Quinn replied firmly, "and it's Territorial Guard Nolan." With obvious reluctance, the party dismounted. The woman was helped down by one of the men who gripped her elbow with unnecessary force. When she finally looked up, Quinn was struck by her beauty and something else. A defiance burning behind her hazel eyes that contradicted her submissive posture. Inside the small guardhouse, Quinn retrieved the ledger from his desk while the family arranged themselves before him. The woman stood slightly apart, and in the better light he could see her chestnut hair peeking from beneath her bonnet and a fading bruise near her temple. "Your names, ages, and destination," Quinn said, dipping his pen in ink. "I told you, Walter White. These are my sons Jacob and Emmett, my niece Ruby." When Quinn looked at the young woman expectantly, Walter answered for her. "Ruby Winters, age 20, bound for Helena where she's to be married." Quinn noted something pass across Ruby's face, a flash of anger quickly suppressed. "Sign here," Quinn said, turning the ledger toward them. As Walter signed with a flourish, Quinn addressed Ruby directly. "Miss Winters, can you confirm your identity and details?" Before she could answer, Jacob stepped forward. "My cousin doesn't speak to strange men, family custom." Quinn held Ruby's gaze. "The territorial government requires each traveler to confirm their own identity, ma'am. Family custom or not." For a long moment, tension filled the small room. Then Ruby stepped forward, took the pen, and signed her name in elegant script. As she did, she whispered so quietly that only Quinn could hear. "Help me." Quinn's expression remained neutral, though his mind raced. "Everything appears in order," he said, closing the ledger. "The pass ahead has seen bandit activity recently. I recommend caution." Walter smiled thinly. "We're well prepared for any trouble, come Ruby." As they filed out, Ruby was the last to leave. When she passed Quinn, she pressed something into his hand, a small folded piece of paper. He closed his fingers around it, careful to keep his movement hidden from the others. Only after they had departed, dust rising behind their wagon as they continued toward the mountain pass, did Quinn unfold the paper. "They are not my family. They are taking me to marry a man in Helena against my will. Please help. I am Ruby Winters, daughter of Captain James Winters, Territorial Army." Quinn's blood ran cold, Captain Winters his commander. The man who had stationed him at this remote outpost. Quinn hastily packed supplies and saddled his horse. If Ruby Winters was indeed the captain's daughter, then her abductors were in for a rude awakening. And if she wasn't, he was riding into trouble for nothing. Either way, something in those hazel eyes had sparked the first real feeling Quinn had allowed himself in years. "Damn it all," he muttered, mounting his horse. So much for avoiding complications. He spurred his horse forward, leaving the outpost unmanned for the first time in 6 months. Rules and regulations suddenly seemed less important than the whispered plea of a young woman with defiant eyes. The mountain trail twisted treacherously upward, offering frequent glimpses of the wagon ahead. Quinn kept his distance, not wanting to alert Ruby's captors that they were being followed. His military training served him well as he tracked them through the afternoon, careful to remain out of sight while never losing them. As dusk approached, the wagon party made camp in a small clearing beside a creek. Quinn dismounted and secured his horse in a stand of pines, then crept closer on foot. From his vantage point behind a large boulder, he observed their camp, Walter and his sons building a fire while Ruby collected water from the stream under Emmett's watchful eye. Quinn needed to understand the situation better before making a move. Were these men truly forcing Ruby into an unwanted marriage? And if so, why? What could they gain from such an arrangement? As darkness fell, Quinn worked his way closer, using the gathering shadows for cover. The family ate a simple meal around the fire, their conversation carrying faintly to Quinn's hiding place. "We'll reach Helena by tomorrow afternoon," Walter was saying. "Judge Hollister will perform the ceremony immediately. Once you're married to Pearson, you'll learn to be grateful." "I'll never be grateful," Ruby replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "My father will find me." Walter laughed. "Your father is stationed 200 miles away. By the time he learns what's happened, you'll be a properly wedded woman. The wealthy widow Pearson is looking for a young bride, and he'll pay handsomely for the privilege." "You're selling me," Ruby said, disgust evident in her voice. "I'm securing your future," Walter countered. "My sister would have wanted you taken care of. My mother would never have approved of this. She'd be ashamed to call you brother." The sharp crack of a slap echoed through the clearing, and Quinn tensed, his hand dropping to his revolver. "Watch your tongue, girl," Walter growled. "Your mother left you in my care when she died, and I'll decide what's best for you." Quinn had heard enough. These men were indeed forcing Ruby into marriage, likely for financial gain. The mention of her mother's death explained why Captain Winters hadn't spoken of a wife, only a daughter back east finishing her education. He waited until the camp had settled for the night before making his move. Walter and Jacob had retreated to bedrolls near the wagon, while Emmett took the first watch, sitting by the fire with a rifle across his lap. Ruby lay on a bedroll slightly apart from the others, her back to the fire. Quinn circled the camp, approaching from the dark side away from the fire. He moved silently, careful to avoid any twigs or dry leaves that might betray his presence. When he was close enough to Ruby's bedroll, he paused, watching Emmett for any sign of alertness. The man was drowsy, his chin occasionally dropping to his chest before he jerked upright again. Quinn seized his opportunity during one of these moments, darting forward in a crouch and placing his hand gently over Ruby's mouth to prevent her from crying out in surprise. Her eyes flew open, wide with terror until she recognized him. He placed a finger to his lips, then slowly removed his hand from her mouth. "Guard Nolan," she whispered, barely audible. "Quinn," he corrected softly. "I'm going to help you, but we need to move quietly. Can you do that?" Ruby nodded, her eyes darting toward Emmett. "Follow me," Quinn breathed. "Stay low and move exactly as I do." Together they crept away from the camp, freezing whenever Emmett stirred. It took nearly 15 minutes to reach the tree line, moving inch by careful inch. Once among the pines, Quinn took Ruby's hand and led her swiftly toward where he'd left his horse. They had just reached the animal when a shout erupted from the camp. "She's gone. The girl's gone." "Run," Quinn urged, helping Ruby onto his horse before swinging up behind her. He kicked the horse into motion, one arm wrapped around Ruby's waist to keep her secure as they plunged down a narrow game trail away from the main path. Behind them, angry voices and the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Quinn guided his horse with the skill of someone who'd spent years in the saddle, choosing paths too narrow for the wagon but navigable on horseback. "They'll follow our trail at first light," he told Ruby as they splashed across a shallow stream. "We need to put as much distance between us as possible before dawn." Ruby's body was tense against his, but her voice remained steady. "Where are we going?" "Back to the guard post first. I have supplies there and we can send a telegraph to your father from the nearest station." "Thank you," she said, her voice catching. "I wasn't sure you'd believe me." Quinn guided the horse up a steep embankment. "I wasn't sure either until I heard them talking. No woman should be forced to marry against her will." They rode through the night, pushing the horse as hard as they dared on the treacherous mountain trails. As the first light of dawn broke across the eastern sky, the guard post came into view in the valley below. "We'll rest here briefly," Quinn said as they dismounted. "Gather what we need, then continue to the telegraph station at Copper Creek." Inside the guard post, Quinn quickly assembled supplies: ammunition, food, a canteen of fresh water, and a heavy blanket. Ruby stood by the window, watching the trail behind them. "You risked your position to help me," she observed. "Why?" Quinn paused in his packing. "Your father is a good man. He deserves better than having his daughter sold off." "Is that the only reason?" Their eyes met across the small room, and for the first time in years, Quinn felt something crack in the wall he'd built around himself. "No," he admitted. "I suppose it's not." Before Ruby could respond, the sound of approaching riders shattered the moment. Quinn peered out the window to see Walter and his sons galloping toward the guard post. "They're here," he said grimly, checking his revolver. "Out the back, quickly." They slipped through the rear door just as Walter's party reached the front of the building. Quinn helped Ruby onto his horse, then swung up behind her once more. "Hold tight," he instructed, spurring the horse into a gallop as shots rang out behind them. They rode hard across the open country, heading toward a line of hills that would provide cover. Quinn's horse, already tired from the night's journey, labored beneath their combined weight. Behind them, Walter and his sons gave chase, their fresh mounts gradually closing the distance. "They're gaining," Ruby said, glancing over her shoulder. Quinn surveyed the terrain ahead, making a quick decision. "There's a narrow canyon through those hills. The entrance is hard to spot if you don't know it's there. We might lose them." He guided the horse toward what appeared to be a solid rock face, only revealing itself as a passage when they were almost upon it. The canyon was barely wide enough for a horse in some places, its walls rising steep on either side. They navigated its twisting path until it opened into a secluded valley, hidden from the main trail. "We'll rest here," Quinn said, dismounting and helping Ruby down. "There's water for the horse, and they'll have a hard time finding this place if they don't know where to look." Ruby surveyed their surroundings, a small meadow enclosed by rocky cliffs with a spring bubbling from the stone to form a clear pool. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "How do you know of this place?" "I've spent months exploring these mountains," Quinn replied, leading his horse to water. "When you're alone at a frontier post, you either go mad with boredom or you learn every inch of the land." Ruby studied him as he unsaddled the horse. "You prefer being alone." Quinn hesitated, then nodded. "It's simpler." "Safer." "Safer how?" He busied himself with the saddle blanket, avoiding her gaze. "People let you down, or they leave. Out here, the only person who can disappoint me is myself." Ruby was quiet for a long moment. "My mother died 3 years ago," she finally said. "Consumption. My father sent me to stay with my uncle Walter's brother, not Walter himself, while he took his military post here in the territory. I was finishing school in Pennsylvania when Walter showed up, claiming my real uncle had died and left me in his care. Quinn turned to face her, seeing the pain etched in her expression. I knew something was wrong, she continued. But he had papers forged, I now believe, and I had no way to contact my father directly. The school released me to him. It wasn't until we were already traveling west that I learned his true intentions. To marry you off to this Pearson fellow. Ruby nodded. A wealthy mine owner in Helena, 60 years old and already buried 3 wives. Walter arranged the match for a price, $5,000. Quinn's jaw tightened. Your father will have him arrested for kidnapping. If we reach him in time. Ruby walked to the edge of the pool, kneeling to splash water on her face. I haven't seen my father in almost a year. He writes regularly, but letters take so long to reach Pennsylvania. Captain Winters speaks of you often, Quinn said, joining her by the water. He keeps your photograph on his desk. Ruby looked up, surprise and pleasure mingling in her expression. He does. Quinn nodded. He's proud of you, says you have your mother's intelligence and spirit. A smile transformed Ruby's face, making her even more beautiful. Quinn found himself staring and quickly looked away, uncomfortable with the warmth spreading through his chest. We should rest while we can, he said, unrolling the blanket in a shady spot. Take turns keeping watch. I'll go first. Ruby settled onto the blanket while Quinn positioned himself on a rock overlooking the canyon entrance. The day grew warmer as the sun climbed higher, and the only sounds were birdsong and the gentle splashing of the spring. Despite his determination to remain alert, Quinn found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Ruby. She'd removed her bonnet, revealing the full glory of her chestnut hair cascading down her back. In sleep, the wariness left her face, making her appear even younger than her 20 years. Something protective stirred within him, an unfamiliar feeling after so long keeping everyone at a distance. He turned away, focusing on the canyon entrance. Getting attached would be foolish. Once Ruby was safely with her father, Quinn would return to his solitary post, to the simple life he'd chosen. But as the day wore on and they took turns watching, sharing the meager rations he'd packed, Quinn found himself telling Ruby things he'd never told anyone. About his parents' deaths on the Oregon Trail, about the years after when he drifted from place to place, always alone, always careful not to form connections that would inevitably lead to pain. That's a lonely way to live, Ruby said as afternoon shadows lengthened across their hidden valley. Quinn shrugged. It's a choice. The frontier doesn't forgive weakness. Caring about people makes you vulnerable. It also makes you strong, Ruby countered. My father says the settlers who survive out here are the ones who band together, who build communities. Your father is a wise man. Yet you choose isolation. Quinn had no answer for that. Instead, he stood, checking the position of the sun. We should move soon, make for Copper Creek before dark. They packed their few supplies and saddled the horse in companionable silence. As Quinn helped Ruby mount, their hands touched, and for a brief moment neither moved away. Her skin was soft against his calloused palm, and her eyes, when they met his, held no judgment for his chosen solitude, only a gentle question. The moment broke when the horse snorted and shifted beneath her. Quinn cleared his throat and swung up behind her, keenly aware of her body against his as they rode out of the hidden valley. They had just emerged from the canyon when a rifle shot cracked the air. Quinn's horse reared, nearly throwing them both, as Walter and his sons appeared on the ridge above. There they are, Jacob shouted, raising his rifle for another shot. Quinn spurred his horse forward, galloping across open ground toward the shelter of a distant tree line. Bullets kicked up dust around them as Walter's party gave chase, closing in from the higher ground. Hold tight, Quinn shouted to Ruby, pushing his exhausted mount to its limits. They reached the trees just as another volley of shots rang out. Quinn felt Ruby jerk against him, heard her sharp cry of pain. Ruby, fear lanced through him. My arm, she gasped, I'm hit. Quinn glanced down to see blood soaking her sleeve, but there was no time to stop. Walter and his sons were still in pursuit, now entering the forest behind them. He guided his horse deeper among the trees, following a deer trail that twisted through dense underbrush. The sound of pursuit grew fainter as the forest thickened. Quinn finally drew his horse to a halt in a small clearing, helping Ruby dismount before examining her wound. The bullet had grazed her upper arm, tearing through sleeve and skin but missing bone and major vessels. "It looks worse than it is," he assured her, tearing a strip from his shirt to bind the wound, "but it needs proper cleaning to prevent infection." Ruby nodded, her face pale but composed. "I'll be fine. We need to keep moving." Quinn studied her with newfound respect. Many frontier men would have made more fuss over a similar injury. "You're stronger than you look, Ruby Winters." A small smile touched her lips. "My father raised me not to wilt at the first sign of trouble." Before Quinn could respond, the crack of a branch alerted him to danger. He pushed Ruby behind him, drawing his revolver just as Emmett White stepped into the clearing, rifle aimed at Quinn's chest. "Well now," Emmett drawled, "isn't this touching, the noble guard rescuing the damsel?" Quinn kept his voice steady. "Lower your weapon, White. Kidnapping the daughter of a territorial officer is a hanging offense." Emmett's smile was cold. "Only if we're caught, and right now, all I see is a deserter who abandoned his post and stole a girl rightfully under her uncle's guardianship." "He's not my uncle," Ruby said from behind Quinn. "And I'm not property to be sold." $5,000 says different, miss." Emmett took a step closer. "Now, both of you are coming with me. Pa and Jacob are circling around. You've nowhere to run." Quinn's mind raced, calculating angles and distances. Emmett had the advantage with his rifle, but the man's stance betrayed his overconfidence. "I'm not going anywhere with you," Ruby declared, stepping out from behind Quinn despite his attempt to keep her sheltered. Emmett's eyes flicked to her just for an instant. It was all the distraction Quinn needed. He fired, his bullet striking Emmett's shoulder, spinning the man around and sending his rifle flying. Quinn closed the distance in 3 quick strides, delivering a blow to Emmett's jaw that dropped him unconscious to the forest floor. "We need to move," Quinn said urgently, retrieving Emmett's rifle and ammunition. "The others will have heard the shot." They mounted quickly, Quinn now armed with both his revolver and Emmett's rifle. Instead of continuing through the forest, he guided the horse up a rocky slope that would leave minimal tracks. "Copper Creek is still 10 miles east," he told Ruby as they emerged onto a ridge overlooking the vast Montana landscape. "We'll never make it before dark and the horse needs rest." Ruby leaned back against him, her body warm despite her injury. "What about the Dawson homestead? It should be just beyond that line of cottonwoods to the south." Quinn frowned. "How do you know about the Dawsons?" "My father mentioned them in his letters, said they were good people who'd settled near the Eastern Patrol route. It was a risk. The Dawsons might offer shelter, or they might turn them away, or worse, side with Walter if he arrived with his story of a kidnapped niece. But with Ruby injured and their horse exhausted, options were limited. The Dawsons it is," Quinn decided, turning the horse southward. As they rode, the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Despite the danger, Quinn found himself acutely aware of Ruby's presence. The subtle lavender scent of her hair, the resilience in her slender frame, the way she fit against him as if she belonged there. It was dangerous thinking. Once this was over, once Ruby was safe with her father, Quinn would return to his solitary post and his uncomplicated existence. These unfamiliar feelings would fade, as all feelings eventually did. The Dawson homestead appeared just as twilight deepened to dusk, a sturdy log cabin with smoke rising from the chimney, a well-tended vegetable garden, and a small barn. As they approached, a man emerged from the cabin, shotgun in hand. "That's far enough," he called. "State your business." Quinn reined in the horse. "My name is Quinn Nolan, Territorial Guard. This is Miss Ruby Winters, daughter of Captain James Winters. We seek shelter for the night. Miss Winters is injured." The man lowered his shotgun slightly. "The captain's daughter. Martha, come out here." A woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw Ruby's bloodied sleeve, she hurried forward. "My stars, child, what happened to you?" "Thomas, help them down and bring that horse to the barn. Can't you see they're exhausted?" The transformation from suspicion to hospitality was immediate. Within minutes, Quinn found himself seated at the Dawsons' kitchen table while Martha tended to Ruby's wound with gentle efficiency. Thomas Dawson, a weathered man in his 50s, offered Quinn coffee laced with whiskey. "The captain's been good to us settlers," Thomas explained. "Keeps the peace with the Blackfoot, runs a fair patrol." His daughter's welcome at our table anytime. His expression darkened. Who did this to her? Quinn explained the situation while Martha cleaned and bandaged Ruby's arm. The Dawsons' outrage grew with each detail of Walter's scheme. "Selling a young woman to that old reprobate Pearson," Martha exclaimed. "It's barbaric. Why, everyone knows about his other wives, the last one barely 18 when she died in childbirth." "We need to reach the telegraph office in Copper Creek," Quinn said. "Alert Captain Winters." Thomas nodded. "I'll take you myself at first light. No sense traveling these roads at night, not with those men still out there hunting you." After a hot meal that tasted better than anything Quinn had eaten in months, Martha showed them to sleeping quarters, Ruby in their daughter's old room, and Quinn on a pallet near the hearth. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded Quinn. He lay awake, listening to the settling sounds of the cabin and thinking about the woman resting down the hall. In just one day, Ruby Winters had disrupted the careful isolation Quinn had maintained for years. Her courage, her resilience, the trust she'd placed in him, all of it had somehow breached his defenses. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. A floorboard creaked and Quinn sat up to find Ruby standing in the shadows, wrapped in a borrowed shawl. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered, moving to sit beside him near the dying embers of the fire. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them chasing us." Quinn nodded, understanding all too well how danger lingered in the mind long after the immediate threat had passed. "Thank you," Ruby said after a moment. "Not just for rescuing me, but for believing me, for risking everything to help a stranger." "You're not exactly a stranger," Quinn replied. "Your father speaks of you so often I feel I've known you for months." Ruby smiled, the firelight casting a warm glow on her features. "And what does he say about me?" "That you're stubborn, independent-minded, that you write poetry and play the piano, that you have your mother's laugh and his temper." "All true," she admitted with a soft chuckle. "And what will you tell him about me now?" Quinn considered this. "That you're braver than he knows, that you keep your head in danger, that you'd make a fine frontier woman despite your Eastern education." Something shifted in Ruby's expression, a softening, a warmth that made Quinn's heart beat faster. "Is that a compliment, Quinn Nolan?" "An observation," he corrected, though his voice had grown rough. Ruby studied him, her head tilted slightly. "You've built your life around being alone, haven't you? Is it really so terrible to need other people?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. Quinn looked into the glowing embers, searching for words to explain the safety he'd found in isolation. "When my parents died, I learned that loving people means eventual loss. Out here, that lesson is reinforced daily. Settlers die from sickness, accidents, violence. The ones left behind carry that pain forever. So you chose not to care at all." "I chose not to risk it." Ruby's hand found his in the darkness, her touch light but definite. "That sounds more like existing than living." Quinn didn't pull away. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to acknowledge the emptiness at the core of his chosen solitude, the human connection he denied himself in the name of self-preservation. "Maybe you're right," he admitted, his voice barely audible. They sat in silence, her hand in his, until the fire died to nothing more than faint red coals. Only then did Ruby rise and return to her room, leaving Quinn with thoughts more tumultuous than any he'd faced on the frontier. Morning arrived with the crowing of the Dawsons' rooster and the smell of frying bacon. After a hearty breakfast, Thomas hitched his wagon while Martha packed them food for the journey. "Copper Creek is 4 hours by wagon," Thomas told them as they set out. "My son-in-law runs the general store there. The telegraph office is right next door." Quinn rode alongside the wagon on his now-rested horse, constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of pursuit. Ruby sat beside Thomas, her injured arm in a fresh bandage, her face determined despite the danger still facing them. The journey passed without incident, the Montana landscape unfolding around them in rolling hills and vast prairies. By midday, they reached Copper Creek, a growing settlement that served as a supply point for nearby homesteads and mining operations. Thomas drove directly to the general store, where they were greeted by his son-in-law, a friendly man named Peter Jenkins. "The telegraph office is right through that door," Peter explained after hearing their situation. "The operator's having his lunch, but I'll fetch him." While they waited, Quinn moved to the store's front window, watching the street for any sign of Walter and his remaining son. Ruby joined him, her shoulder brushing his as they stood side by side. "What will you do after," she asked quietly, "when this is over?" Quinn had been asking himself the same question since waking that morning. The answer that had always seemed so clear, returned to his post, to his solitary existence, now felt hollow. Before he could respond, Peter returned with the telegraph operator, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose. "I understand there's an urgent message for Captain Winters," the operator said, producing a pencil and paper. "What would you like it to say?" Ruby dictated a brief message explaining her situation and location. The operator nodded, making notes. "I'll send it immediately. The captain should receive it within the hour if he's at headquarters in Fort Benton." Relief washed over Ruby's face. "Thank you." The telegraph operator had just left when Quinn spotted a familiar wagon rolling into town. "They're here," he said grimly, stepping away from the window. "Walter and Jacob." Thomas moved to the door, shotgun in hand. "Peter, take Miss Winters to the back room. Quinn and I will handle this." Ruby shook her head. "No. I'm tired of hiding from these men. This ends now." Before anyone could stop her, she strode to the store's entrance and stepped onto the boardwalk. Quinn hurried after her, his hand on his revolver. Walter spotted them immediately, bringing the wagon to a halt in the middle of the street. He and Jacob descended, their expressions thunderous. "Ruby," Walter called, his voice carrying the false concern of a worried guardian. "Thank God we found you. This man kidnapped you from our camp." Several townspeople had stopped to watch the confrontation, their faces curious. Ruby stood tall, her voice clear and carrying. "This man is lying. He is not my uncle. He kidnapped me from my school in Pennsylvania and was attempting to sell me into marriage with Judge Pearson in Helena." Walter's face darkened. "The girl is confused. She had a fall from her horse and has been talking nonsense. I'm her legal guardian." "My father is Captain James Winters of the Territorial Army," Ruby declared, "and we've just telegraphed him my location." At the mention of Captain Winters, murmurs spread through the gathering crowd. The captain's reputation was well known throughout the territory. Jacob stepped forward, his hand moving toward his gun. "Pa, we need to leave, now." Quinn drew his revolver in one fluid motion. "Touch that gun and it'll be the last thing you do, White." The tension in the street was palpable. Walter's eyes darted between Ruby and Quinn, calculating his options. Then with desperate suddenness he lunged forward and grabbed Ruby, pulling her against him with a knife at her throat. "Back away, guard," Walter snarled, "or I'll cut her pretty throat." Time seemed to slow. Quinn could see the fear in Ruby's eyes, the slight tremor in Walter's hand as he held the knife. Around them, the townspeople had frozen, witnessing the drama unfold but helpless to intervene. "Let her go, Walter," Quinn said evenly, his revolver still aimed. "This won't end well for you." "Shut your mouth," Walter spat. "Jacob, get the wagon ready, we're leaving with the girl." As Jacob moved toward the wagon, Ruby's eyes met Quinn's. In that silent exchange something passed between them, a trust, a plan unspoken. Quinn gave an almost imperceptible nod. In one swift motion, Ruby drove her elbow hard into Walter's stomach. As he doubled over, his grip loosening, Quinn fired. The bullet found its mark in Walter's shoulder, sending him sprawling backward onto the dusty street. Jacob drew his gun, but Thomas was faster, his shotgun blast taking Jacob in the leg. Both white men lay wounded and disarmed as the town sheriff, alerted by the gunfire, came running. "What in tarnation is happening here?" the sheriff demanded, surveying the scene. Quinn kept his revolver trained on Walter as he explained the situation. The sheriff, recognizing Captain Winters' name, had Walter and Jacob placed under arrest and taken to the town jail to await the captain's arrival. As the excitement subsided, Quinn found Ruby standing apart, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm day. He approached her slowly. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands were shaking. "I thought. When he grabbed me, I thought I might never." Quinn did what felt natural, drawing her into his arms as the tension of the past days finally overwhelmed her. She pressed her face against his chest, her body trembling with delayed fear and relief. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now." They remained that way, oblivious to the curious glances of the townspeople, until Thomas approached with news. "Just heard from the telegraph office. Captain Winters is on his way with a detachment of soldiers, should be here by nightfall." Ruby pulled back, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson, for everything." Thomas smiled kindly. "Least we could do. Now come inside, both of you. Martha's ordered us rooms at the hotel. You could use some proper rest." The Copper Creek Hotel was a modest two-story building with clean rooms and real beds, a luxury Quinn hadn't experienced in months. After washing away the dust of their journey, he joined Ruby and the Dawsons for a late lunch in the hotel dining room. The conversation flowed easily, yet Quinn found himself increasingly preoccupied with thoughts of the coming evening. Once Captain Winters arrived, Quinn's role in Ruby's rescue would be complete. She would return to her father's protection, and Quinn would return to his outpost, alone. The realization sat like a stone in his stomach, souring the taste of the finest meal he'd had in half a year. "Quinn," Ruby's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You haven't heard a word I've said, have you?" He blinked, focusing on her concerned expression. "Sorry, just thinking." "About what?" Quinn hesitated, aware of the Dawsons' interested gazes. "About what happens next." Understanding dawned in Ruby's eyes. She turned to the Dawsons. "Would you excuse us for a moment? I'd like to speak with Guard Nolan privately." Once they were alone, walking slowly down the hotel's narrow hallway, Ruby spoke with characteristic directness. "You're planning to leave once my father arrives, aren't you?" Quinn nodded. "That was always the plan, get you safely to your father, then return to my post." "And that's what you want?" The question hung between them, deceptively simple yet profoundly complex. Quinn stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "What I want hasn't mattered for a long time, Ruby. I've built my life around what's safe, what's predictable." Ruby stepped closer, her hazel eyes searching his. "And how has that worked out for you? Are you happy, alone at your outpost with only your thoughts for company?" "Happy isn't the point," Quinn replied, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Survival is." "That's not living, Quinn." "That's just not dying," Ruby's voice softened. "I've watched you these past days. You're not the cold, isolated man you pretend to be. You care, you feel, you risked everything to help me." Quinn looked away, unable to hold her gaze. "That was different." "Why? Because I'm the captain's daughter." "No," the word came out rough, almost angry. Because I." Ruby waited, her patience a gentle pressure pulling words from him that he'd never intended to speak. "Because you made me remember what it feels like to care about someone," Quinn finally admitted, "and it terrifies me." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Ruby's expression softened, and she reached up to touch his face, her fingers light against his cheek. "It terrifies everyone, Quinn. That's what makes it real." Before he could respond, a commotion from the street drew their attention. Looking out the window, Quinn saw a detachment of territorial soldiers riding into town, led by a distinguished officer whom he recognized immediately. "Your father's here," he said, stepping back from Ruby's touch. Captain James Winters dismounted outside the hotel, his face etched with concern as he scanned the building's facade. When Ruby emerged onto the porch, the captain's expression transformed with relief. "Ruby," he rushed forward, gathering his daughter into a careful embrace, mindful of her injured arm. "Thank God you're safe." Quinn hung back, watching their reunion with a mixture of satisfaction and an unfamiliar emptiness. He'd completed his mission. Ruby was with her father, safe from Walter White's schemes. It should have felt like victory. Instead, as Captain Winters led Ruby inside, introducing her to his officers and thanking the Dawsons profusely, Quinn slipped away. He retrieved his horse from the livery stable and prepared to depart without farewells. Clean breaks were best, he'd learned that lesson years ago. He was adjusting his saddle when a voice stopped him. "Leaving without saying goodbye, Guard Nolan." Quinn turned to find Captain Winters standing at the stable entrance, his expression unreadable. "Sir," Quinn straightened, habit bringing him to attention, "I was planning to return to my post immediately." "Were you indeed?" The captain stepped forward. "Without allowing me to properly thank you for saving my daughter's life." No thanks necessary, sir. Just doing my duty. Captain Winters studied him thoughtfully. Ruby tells a different story, says you abandoned your post to rescue her, risked your career and your life. That doesn't sound like simple duty to me. Quinn had no response that wouldn't reveal more than he wished to share. The captain continued, his voice softening. She also tells me you believe the frontier is no place for connections. That you've chosen isolation as a form of protection. Uncomfortable with this turn in the conversation, Quinn busied himself checking his saddlebags. With all due respect, sir, my personal philosophy isn't relevant to the situation. Isn't it? Captain Winters moved closer, lowering his voice. My wife died 3 years ago, Nolan. I thought the pain would kill me too. For a time, I wished it would. Quinn stilled, surprised by the captain's candor. But do you know what I realized? Winters continued. The pain was so devastating precisely because what we had was so precious, and if given the choice to spare myself that pain by never having loved her at all, he shook his head, I wouldn't take it. Not for all the gold in Montana. Quinn finally met his commander's gaze. Sir, My daughter is the strongest, most stubborn woman I know, Winters interrupted, just like her mother. And I've never seen her look at anyone the way she looks at you. The captain's words hung in the air between them, an unexpected benediction that Quinn hadn't realized he was seeking. I'm offering you a choice, Nolan, Winters said. Return to your solitary outpost if that's truly what you want, or come with us to Fort Benton. I could use a man of your caliber on my personal staff. He paused meaningfully. The choice is yours. With that, the captain turned and left the stable, leaving Quinn alone with his thoughts and a decision that suddenly seemed to encompass far more than a simple change in posting. Quinn led his horse out into the late afternoon sunlight, his mind still processing the captain's offer. Fort Benton meant civilization, community, all the complications he'd been avoiding for years. It also meant proximity to Ruby and the chance to explore whatever was growing between them. He found Ruby waiting on the hotel porch, watching him with those perceptive hazel eyes. When he approached, leading his horse, her expression was guarded. You're leaving. It wasn't a question, but Quinn answered anyway. I was planning to. And now? Quinn took a deep breath, feeling as though he stood on the edge of a precipice. Your father offered me a position on his staff at Fort Benton. Hope flickered across Ruby's face. And what did you tell him? I told him I needed to speak with his daughter first. Ruby's smile was like sunrise breaking across the mountains. And what did you want to say to his daughter? Quinn stepped closer, finally allowing himself to acknowledge what had been building since the moment he'd read her desperate note at the outpost. That maybe I've been wrong about what it means to survive out here, that maybe there's a difference between existing and living. He paused, gathering courage, and that I'd like to find out what that difference is. With you. Ruby closed the distance between them, her eyes never leaving his. Quinn Nolan, are you asking to court me? A smile, perhaps his first genuine smile in years, tugged at his mouth. I believe I am, Miss Winters. If you'll have me. Her answer came not in words but in the gentle press of her lips against his, a kiss that promised beginnings rather than endings, connection rather than isolation. When they parted, Quinn knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't be returning to his solitary outpost. Some risks, it seemed, were worth taking after all. 6 months later, Fort Benton, Montana territory. Quinn adjusted his dress uniform, unaccustomed to the formal attire after years of practical frontier clothing. In the mirror, a stranger looked back at him, clean-shaven, hair neatly trimmed, the insignia of Captain Winters' elite guard unit gleaming on his collar. You look positively civilized, Ruby teased, appearing in the doorway of his quarters. She wore a pale blue dress that complemented her chestnut hair, which fell in loose curls around her shoulders. I feel like I'm in costume, Quinn admitted, tugging at his collar. Remind me again why we're doing this. Ruby crossed the room to straighten his jacket. Because it's the governor's reception, and as one of my father's senior guards, your presence is required. Her eyes sparkled with mischief. And because I want to show off my handsome beau to all of Helena society. Quinn captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. Your father will have something to say about that kind of talk, Miss Winters. My father adores you and you know it, Ruby smiled up at him. Besides, he'll be too busy entertaining the governor to notice if we slip away early. The past 6 months had transformed Quinn's life in ways he could never have anticipated. His position on Captain Winter's personal guard gave him purpose and community, while his courtship of Ruby had awakened feelings he'd long buried. Together, they had navigated the challenges of frontier society, Ruby adjusting to life in the territory after her Eastern education, Quinn learning to open himself to friendship and connection after years of self-imposed isolation. Walter and Jacob White had been tried and sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison for kidnapping and attempted forced marriage. The knowledge that they were safely behind bars had allowed Ruby to fully embrace her new life in Montana. "Are you nervous about tonight?" Ruby asked, her hands resting lightly on his chest. Quinn considered the question. 6 months ago, the prospect of a formal governor's reception would have been his idea of torture. Now, with Ruby by his side, it seemed merely an adventure to be shared. "Not nervous," he replied truthfully, "just wondering when my life became so full." Ruby's expression softened. "Are you happy with that fullness? Sometimes I worry that I pulled you too far from the solitude you valued." Quinn wrapped his arms around her waist, drawing her closer. "I thought I valued solitude because I didn't know there was anything better. I was wrong." Their kiss was interrupted by a knock at the door, followed by Captain Winter's amused voice. "If you two are quite finished, the carriage is waiting." Ruby laughed against Quinn's lips before calling back, "We'll be right there, father." The governor's reception was held at Helena's grandest hotel, with military officers, politicians, and wealthy citizens mingling in elegant surroundings. Quinn stayed close to Ruby, still uncomfortable with large social gatherings but determined to support her as she charmed the territory's elite. Captain Winters introduced them to the governor, who recognized Quinn's name immediately. "Ah, the frontier guard who rescued the captain's daughter. I've heard the story several times now. Quite the romantic tale." Quinn felt himself flush. "I was just doing my duty, sir." "Nonsense," the governor replied with a hearty laugh. "From what I hear, you risked everything for this young lady. That goes beyond duty," he winked at Ruby. "You found yourself a brave one, Miss Winters." As the evening progressed, Quinn was surprised to find himself enjoying the conversations and connections. He met ranchers whose lands bordered his former outpost, merchants whose supply trains he had once guarded, and settlers whose homesteads he had visited during patrols. The territory suddenly seemed less vast and impersonal, filled instead with a web of relationships and shared experiences. During a lull in the festivities, Ruby led him to a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The night was clear, stars scattered across the Montana sky like diamonds on velvet. "You've been watching Judge Pearson all evening," Ruby observed, following Quinn's gaze to where the elderly judge conversed with a group of politicians. "Are you imagining what might have happened if Walter had succeeded?" Quinn's jaw tightened. The man's buried 3 wives already, none lasted more than 2 years. Ruby leaned her head against his shoulder. "Well, he'll have to find his 4th elsewhere. I have other plans." The certainty in her voice warmed Quinn more than the spring evening. Over the past months, their courtship had deepened into a love neither had expected, Quinn finding in Ruby a partner who challenged his isolation without demanding he change entirely, and Ruby discovering in Quinn a steadiness that anchored her adventurous spirit. "Do these plans include a certain frontier guard?" Quinn asked, his voice light though his heart raced. Ruby turned to face him fully. "They might, if you were to ask the right question." Quinn took her hands in his, suddenly certain of what he wanted in a way he had never been before. "I came to Montana to escape connections, convinced that caring for people only led to pain. You showed me that a life without those connections isn't really living at all." Ruby's eyes glistened in the starlight as Quinn continued. "I don't have much to offer, no fortune, no grand estate, just myself and a promise that I'll never retreat into solitude again, not as long as you'll have me by your side." He took a deep breath. "Ruby Winters, will you marry me?" Ruby's smile was radiant. "Yes, Quinn Nolan, 1,000 times yes." As they sealed their promise with a kiss, Quinn marveled at the journey that had brought him here, from a lonely outpost guarding an empty past to this moment of perfect certainty. The frontier had taught him to survive, but Ruby had taught him to live. And when Captain Winters found them on the balcony minutes later, their joy was explanation enough. He embraced them both, his approval evident in his misty eyes. "I couldn't wish for a better man for my daughter," he told Quinn, "though I expect you to continue in my service even after the wedding. Good guards are hard to find." Quinn grinned, his arm around Ruby's waist. "I wouldn't dream of serving anywhere else, sir." The captain nodded, satisfied, before his expression grew more serious. "There is one matter we should discuss, though perhaps not tonight. It concerns your future." "My future is right here," Quinn said, glancing at Ruby with a smile. "Indeed," Captain Winters hesitated, "but there's something you should know. Something few people are aware of." He looked around to ensure their privacy. "Come see me tomorrow morning, both of you. There's a proposition I'd like to discuss." With that cryptic statement, the captain returned to the reception, leaving Quinn and Ruby exchanging puzzled glances. "What do you suppose that's about?" Ruby wondered. Quinn shook his head. "No idea, but whatever it is, we'll face it together." Morning found them in Captain Winters' office at Fort Benton, curiosity piqued by the captain's mysterious invitation. The office was tidy and military in its precision, with maps of the territory covering one wall and a portrait of Ruby's mother gracing another. Captain Winters welcomed them with a warmth that still surprised Quinn, given their formal relationship before Ruby's rescue. The captain had come to treat Quinn almost like a son in the months since, mentoring him in military matters and sharing stories of his late wife during quiet evenings at his quarters. "Please sit," the captain said, gesturing to chairs before his desk. "What I'm about to tell you is known to very few people, and I'd ask that it remain that way until certain matters are settled." Quinn and Ruby exchanged glances as they took their seats. Captain Winters opened a drawer and removed a leather portfolio, which he placed on the desk between them. "Quinn, what do you know about the North Star Ranch?" Quinn blinked, surprised by the question. "One of the largest cattle operations in the territory, owned by some Eastern consortium, I believe, must be 50,000 acres at least." The captain nodded. 63,000 actually. "Prime grazing land, good water rights, excellent breeding stock, conservative value of nearly $1 million. "Father, what does this have to do with Quinn?" Ruby asked, curiosity evident in her voice. Captain Winters opened the portfolio, revealing legal documents with official seals. 18 years ago, a young couple arrived in Montana Territory with their 8-year-old son. Joseph and Margaret Nolan had sold everything they owned in Pennsylvania to purchase a small ranch here. They worked that land for 6 years, building it into a profitable operation. Quinn stared at the captain, his heart suddenly racing. "My parents." "Yes," Captain Winters met his gaze steadily. "Before they decided to visit family in Oregon, your father made certain arrangements. He transferred ownership of the ranch to a trust, with instructions that should anything happen to him and your mother, the property would be held until you reached the age of 25. Quinn felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. "But our ranch was tiny, just 100 acres, nothing like North Star. Your father was a shrewd investor. The original property bordered what would become prime grazing territory. As neighboring properties came up for sale, the trust purchased them using profits from the original land. Over 18 years under careful management, the holdings expanded significantly." The captain pushed a document toward Quinn. "This is the deed to the North Star Ranch. It belongs to you, Quinn, all of it." Ruby gasped, her hand finding Quinn's. "Quinn, you're wealthy," Captain Winters finished. "Extraordinarily so. The ranch has been operated by managers who believed they were working for an Eastern investment group. Only the Territorial Land Office and myself, as trustee, knew the truth." Quinn stared at the document, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what he was being told. For years he'd lived as a drifter, then a solitary guard, believing he had nothing but his own 2 hands. And all that time, he'd been the heir to one of the territory's largest fortunes. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" he finally asked, his voice rough with emotion. "All these years. Your father's instructions were explicit. You were to be informed 1 month before your 25th birthday, which is today, or upon your engagement to be married, whichever came first." Captain Winters smiled at Ruby. When you told me of your engagement last night, it triggered my obligation as trustee. Quinn looked at the document again, then at Ruby, whose eyes reflected his own astonishment. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything now, Captain Winters said gently. Take some time to absorb the news. The ranch is yours to do with as you please, sell it, run it yourself, maintain the current management. The choice is entirely yours. As they left the office, documents in hand, Quinn felt dazed. The morning sun seemed too bright, the fort's activities too loud as they walked in silence toward the river that flowed past Fort Benton. Are you all right? Ruby asked when they reached a quiet spot overlooking the water. Quinn ran a hand through his hair. I don't know. Yesterday I was a frontier guard with nothing to offer you but myself. Today I'm apparently the owner of the largest ranch in the territory. Ruby took his hands in hers. You're the same man today that you were yesterday, Quinn Nolan, the same man I fell in love with. The same man I agreed to marry. But everything's changed. Has it? You once told me that you chose isolation because caring about people made you vulnerable. That wealth won't change unless you let it. She squeezed his hands. The question is, what will you do with this opportunity? Quinn looked out at the river, considering her question. The enormity of his inheritance was still difficult to comprehend, but Ruby's steady presence anchored him. I never wanted wealth or power, he said slowly. Just purpose, connection, the things I ran from for so long. And now you have both, Ruby observed. Connection with me, with my father, with the community we've built here. And the purpose that comes with responsibility. Quinn nodded, his thoughts clearing. The ranch employs dozens of people. Their livelihoods depend on its success. And the land itself needs proper stewardship, Ruby added. Something your parents understood. Quinn felt a sudden, fierce pride in the parents he'd lost so young. They had created this legacy for him, believing in a future he might build even when they could no longer be part of it. I want to see it, he decided. The ranch, our ranch. Ruby's smile was radiant. I was hoping you'd say that. 2 days later, they rode through the main gates of the North Star Ranch, accompanied by Captain Winters. The property stretched as far as the eye could see, lush pastures dotted with grazing cattle, stands of pine providing shelter from Montana's harsh weather, a creek winding its way through the valley. The main house was larger than Quinn had expected, a handsome two-story structure built of local stone and timber. As they approached, a man in his 60s emerged onto the porch, watching their arrival with evident curiosity. That's Henry Garrison, Captain Winters explained. He's managed the ranch for the past 12 years, thinks he works for an investment consortium back east. Quinn dismounted, helping Ruby down from her horse before approaching the house. Garrison came down the steps to meet them, his weathered face cautious. Captain Winters, he acknowledged with a nod, didn't expect a visit. Is there a problem? No problem, Henry. I've brought someone you should meet, the captain gestured to Quinn. This is Quinn Nolan, Joseph Nolan's son. Garrison's expression transformed from wariness to shock. Joseph's boy. Little Quinn, he looked Quinn up and down, recognition dawning. Good Lord, I can see it now, you have your father's eyes. You knew my father? Quinn asked, surprised. Knew him, I worked for him when he first started this place. Was here when you were born, though you wouldn't remember me. I left before, he stopped, looking uncomfortable, before your parents decided to travel west. Quinn extended his hand. It's good to meet you, Mr. Garrison. As they shook hands, Garrison glanced at Captain Winters, understanding dawning. He knows, then, about the ranch. He does now. Quinn is 25 next month. Per Joseph's instructions, the property transfers to his control. Garrison seemed to process this information, then straightened his shoulders. Well then, Mr. Nolan, I suppose you'll be wanting a full accounting of the operation. We're running about 12,000 head of cattle, 600 horses, staff of 35, including cowboys, blacksmiths, cooks, and hands. I would like to see everything, Quinn confirmed. But please call me Quinn, and this is Ruby Winters, my fiancée. Garrison's eyes widened further. The captain's daughter, well now that's a development. Over the next several days, Quinn immersed himself in learning about the ranch his parents had begun, and that had grown to such impressive proportions in their absence. Garrison proved an excellent teacher, taking evident pride in showing Quinn every aspect of the operation. The cowboys were initially wary of Quinn, uncertain what this change in ownership might mean for their positions. But as Quinn rode with them, worked alongside them, and listened to their concerns, their respect grew. By the end of the week, he was being treated as one of them rather than an outsider. Ruby, meanwhile, explored the main house and grounds with enthusiasm, already envisioning the home they would make there. The house had been maintained but not truly lived in, used primarily for business operations rather than as a family home. She saw potential in every room, from the spacious kitchen to the master bedroom with its view of the mountains. On their final evening before returning to Fort Benton, Quinn and Ruby sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "What do you think?" Ruby asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "Can you see us building a life here?" Quinn gazed out at the land that was now his, the legacy his parents had left him, and that he would someday pass to his own children. "I can," he said softly, "though it's hard to believe I went from having nothing to all this." "You never had nothing, Quinn," Ruby corrected gently. "You had yourself. Your strength, your integrity, your capacity for love that you tried so hard to deny." Quinn turned to look at her, this woman who had somehow broken through the walls he'd built around himself. "When Walter White was taking you to Helena, did you ever imagine this is how things would turn out?" Ruby laughed, "That my father's frontier guard would rescue me, steal my heart, and turn out to be secretly wealthy." "Not exactly." "When do you want to be married?" Quinn asked, the question coming naturally now that their future seemed so clear. Ruby considered this. Soon, summer would be beautiful here. "We could have the ceremony on that hill overlooking the valley." Quinn nodded, already envisioning it. "And your father, will he be all right with you living so far from Fort Benton?" "He's talking about retirement," Ruby revealed. "Says now that I'm settled, he's considering going back east, but I think he might be persuaded to stay in Montana if he had a good reason." "Such as?" Ruby smiled mischievously. "Such as a position managing certain legal affairs for the North Star Ranch. He knows the territory and its laws better than anyone." Quinn laughed, pulling her closer. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "Not everything," Ruby admitted. "I never thought I'd fall in love with a man who believed love was a weakness, who walled himself off from the world because he was afraid of losing what he never allowed himself to have." Quinn's expression grew serious. "I was wrong about so many things, about what matters, about what makes a life worth living." "And what does make a life worth living, Quinn Nolan?" He looked out at the land that stretched before them, then back at the woman who had changed everything. "Connection, purpose, building something that will outlast us, loving someone enough to risk the pain of loss because the joy of having them in your life outweighs everything else." Ruby leaned in to kiss him, her lips soft against his. "For a man who claimed he didn't believe in love, you express it beautifully." As darkness fell over the North Star Ranch, Quinn held Ruby close, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. From a lonely frontier outpost to this moment of perfect belonging, he had traveled farther in spirit than in miles. The ranch was his inheritance, but Ruby was his home, the place his heart had searched for without knowing what it sought. Together, they watched the first stars appear in the Montana sky, their future stretching before them as vast and promising as the frontier itself. 3 months later, on a perfect summer day with the mountains standing witness, Quinn Nolan married Ruby Winters on a hillside overlooking the North Star Ranch. The ceremony was attended by the entire ranch staff, the Dawsons, Captain Winters, and various military and civilian friends they'd made in Fort Benton. Ruby wore a gown of ivory silk that her father had ordered from San Francisco, with wildflowers in her chestnut hair. Quinn, at Ruby's insistence, wore not his military uniform but the clothes of a rancher, clean and formal, but representative of the life they would build together. Captain Winters, recently retired from military service and now the legal counsel for the North Star Ranch, gave his daughter away with misty eyes and a firm handshake for his new son-in-law. "Take care of each other," he told them. "That's all that really matters in this life." As they spoke their vows against the backdrop of the land they now shared, Quinn realized how far he had come from the solitary, closed-off man who had once guarded a remote frontier pass. The words came easily, a promise not just to Ruby but to himself, to remain open to love, to connection, to the fullness of life he had once feared. I, Quinn Nolan, take you, Ruby Winters, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in prosperity and adversity, in sickness and in health, for all the days of our lives. I give you not only my hand but my heart, not only my promise but my presence in all the journeys that lie ahead. Ruby's voice was clear and strong as she repeated similar vows, her hazel eyes never leaving his. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers from their assembled friends and the ranch hands echoed across the valley. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with a feast prepared by the ranch cook and his assistants, music from a band brought in from Helena, and dancing under lanterns hung from the trees surrounding the main house. As evening fell, Quinn led Ruby away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the property that was now their shared home. Happy Mrs. Nolan, he asked, his arms encircling her waist. Ruby leaned back against him, contentment in every line of her body. Happier than I ever imagined possible. And you, Mr. Nolan? Any regrets about leaving your solitary outpost? Quinn chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest. None whatsoever, though I do sometimes think about how differently things might have turned out if Walter White hadn't kidnapped you. Oh, Ruby turned in his arms to face him. And how's that? If you'd come west normally to visit your father, we might never have met. I'd still be guarding that lonely pass, convinced that isolation was strength and connection was weakness. Quinn shook his head. I might have missed this entire life. Ruby reached up to touch his face, her expression thoughtful. I don't believe that. Some things are meant to be, Quinn. I think we would have found each other somehow, even if the path had been different. Quinn kissed her, still marveling that this remarkable woman was now his wife. You're probably right, you'd have found a way to break through my walls eventually. Of course I would have, Ruby agreed with a laugh. I'm very persistent. They rejoined the celebration hand in hand, accepting congratulations and well wishes from their guests. Captain Winters raised a toast to the newlyweds, his voice carrying across the gathering. To Quinn and Ruby Nolan, may your lives together be as vast and beautiful as the Montana sky, and may you always find in each other the home that transcends any place or property. As glasses were raised and cheers echoed, Quinn looked at the people surrounding them, no longer strangers but friends, family, community. The connections he had once feared now formed a web of support and belonging that enriched rather than endangered him. Later, as the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Quinn and Ruby stood on the porch of the main house, their home, watching as lanterns flickered across the property. What are you thinking? Ruby asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Quinn smiled, drawing her closer. I'm thinking about that poor frontier guard who believed he had nothing to offer a captain's daughter. And how wrong he was. About having nothing to offer. About everything, Quinn clarified. About what makes a person wealthy, about what matters in this life, about his own heart. Ruby's expression softened. And what does he believe now? Quinn looked out at the North Star Ranch, the land, the cattle, the buildings that represented his parents' legacy and his own future. Then he looked at Ruby, whose love had transformed him more profoundly than any inheritance ever could. He believes that the frontier isn't just a place to survive, Quinn said softly. It's a place to build something meaningful, to create connection rather than avoid it, to find home in another person's heart. As moonlight silvered the Montana landscape around them, Quinn and Ruby Nolan entered their home as husband and wife, leaving behind old fears and false beliefs. The wealth Quinn had unexpectedly inherited provided comfort and opportunity, but the true treasure was the love they had found in each other, a love neither had been looking for, but that had found them nonetheless. In the years that followed, the North Star Ranch prospered under Quinn's stewardship. Ruby gave birth to their first child, a son they named Joseph James after both their fathers. 2 years later, a daughter followed, whom they called Margaret after Quinn's mother. Captain Winters built a small house on the property, close enough to be involved in his grandchildren's lives but far enough to give the young family their privacy. Under his guidance, the ranch expanded its operations to include breeding horses for the Territorial Army, providing additional income and security. The Dawsons remained dear friends, visiting often and eventually moving closer when Thomas decided to retire from active farming. Their son-in-law Peter opened a second general store on Northstar property to serve the growing community of ranch workers and their families. Quinn never forgot the lessons he'd learned during those pivotal days when Ruby had entered his life. The frontier guard who had once believed that caring made him vulnerable now understood that love was not a weakness but his greatest strength, the foundation upon which he had built a life richer than any fortune could measure. And on quiet evenings, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Quinn would sometimes turn to Ruby and say, "Thank you for finding me." To which Ruby would always reply, with the smile that had first captured his heart, "Thank you for being worth the search." Together they had transformed a legacy of land into a legacy of love, proving that even on the harsh Montana frontier, the human heart's capacity for connection was the most valuable inheritance of all.